And it's a real pleasure to host you here at Well Labs. And it's been, we've been working together with EDF for a little over a year, I think now.
Yeah.
And it's really a pleasure to finally meet you. But I thought this is your first trip to India, is that right? And then what brought you to here? What were you hoping to get out of this trip? And then just love to hear your impressions.
Well, thank you, Veena. I mean, it is a huge honor to be here, working with Well Labs first and foremost, but also to be in India for the first time ever and actually seeing our collaboration in action and on the ground. So just to back up, Environmental Defense Fund is very much focused on bringing science and data and policy together to come and work towards addressing some of our Earth's most challenging environmental issues. And our water program in particular is focused on helping to address global water scarcity. And we do that by working in partnership with an array of folks, including entities like Well Labs, to co-develop tools and approaches that can help build resilience in our water systems. And so we have largely been focused on efforts in the Western US, where water scarcity is a huge, huge issue. And now we're exploring opportunities to take some of our lessons learned in the US, see where we can replicate and tailor and apply those tools and resources in other regions like India. So we're here right now to explore those types of opportunities.
Fantastic. I mean, I think one of the real attractions for us to work with the Environmental Defense Fund was the real strength of science that you guys bring to the table. And it very much kind of reflects what our own ambitions with science and data are. And I remember my first sort of exposure to EDF actually was at Stockholm, I think a couple of years ago, where I saw kind of the launch of the OpenET product. And it was very, very similar to what we were trying to do in India with with our Jaltol product, which was also a water balance product based on OpenET data sets. And just the parallels, but also the differences,
Yes.
and kind of the potential for what we could do together and learn from each other was really, really exciting. So I'm really happy to see that first conversation 2 years ago has kind of led to a collaboration, and now we're actually working together. A couple of the things that, to think about is over the last year, I mean, I know a lot of your team is based in Texas, very similar to India, and in some ways in a groundwater governance context, being open access groundwater. And at the same time, you also work in California, which has a new groundwater governance law. So one of the things that's really been exciting for us is to be able to learn from you. And I was wondering whether you had some thoughts about sort of just from your observations so far, about where do you see some commonalities and differences?
Well, yeah, just to give you a sense of kind of the scope of the places where we're working, we do work in Texas, but also the Colorado River Basin, California, New Mexico, and the Pacific Northwest. And in all of those places, we have been developing and testing a whole range of tools, ranging from OpenET, which is aimed at filling one of the most important gaps in water management, which is having an understanding of how much water crops consume, to an open source groundwater accounting platform, which is aimed at helping farmers and water managers real time manage how much water they have, kind of like an online checking account, to programs that are aimed at increasing community engagement in decision making, which has been lacking in many places across the world, as well as a real focus on just acknowledging that the agricultural footprint is likely going to have to decrease because of these water scarcity challenges. And there's some very, very tough decisions that are going to have to be made. And so we are very interested, and I think Well Labs is too, on kind of helping to kind of ease that transition for the agricultural community and come up with strategies that reduce the economic impacts to the farming community, but that are also based on the best available science and data. And one of those strategies is focused on multi-benefit land repurposing. So helping the farming community make decisions about how to manage the land that they're not going to have enough water to irrigate. So in India, I think we have a really big opportunity to collaborate on a number of issues around water management. I'm most excited about ways in which we can create the right kind of incentives to create the behavioral changes we want to see that will lead to the outcomes in terms of water resilience that we know are achievable. And so things that are focused on creating increased demand management in ways that can reduce economic impact and again, keep the livelihood of the farming community and the broader community in mind while we're doing that.
Right, absolutely. I think, for me, listening to you, one of the most exciting things is that the conversation on demand side management is just beginning in India, because the conversation for the last 20, 30 years has been very much a supply side conversation. How do we put structures to harvest rainwater? And of course, the need for that hasn't gone away. That continues. But there is a recognition now that there are some places which are closed watersheds. We've kind of already allocated or used up all of the available water such that there's nothing more left to harvest. And then kind of also recognizing in the Indian context, firstly, we're talking about smallholders relatively. Even a large farm in India is a few acres,
Right.
much, much smaller than the US context. But also, we're talking about in some parts of India, having reached basin closure or watershed closure, even as a large fraction of farmers don't have access to irrigation. And so the conversations that we've been having are both about rebalancing and equity on one hand, rather than just completely about cutting back. And it's a much trickier political conversation. Still, unlike the US, a large fraction of India's population and voters are still farmers. And so you really, it's a navigating that conversation, as you can imagine, is much harder. But the potential of really bringing state of the art science, and one of the things that you just mentioned is there's a tendency to think of science as just the physical science, but I really like the things that EDF has done in terms of looking at behavior and then actually looking at policy design and governance. And I think bringing those three together, the biophysical, the behavioral, the policy, really makes it an exciting partnership.
Yeah, we really feel you can't have one without the others. And so really taking a holistic view in terms of kind of the core components that have to be in place in order to have a durable groundwater system long term is really what we're after. And starting at first at kind of where the low-hanging fruit is, and then building trust within communities, and then bringing folks along to understand that the future trajectory can be much more sustainable if we're proactive in getting out ahead of what could be a crisis. And we've seen some of these crises in the Western U.S., and I know some of this is hitting India right now as well. We can avert major crisis if we work together now, come up with pragmatic approaches that meet farmers where they are and kind of make it worth their interest and long-term investment in working in the farming industry to implement them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we've already been working on the monitoring and evaluation toolbox together. And I know over the last couple of days, we've had really interesting conversations on what else we can do. So if I asked you a couple of things that have really inspired you that you could do with Well Labs, but with other partners in the ecosystem, what would those be?
Well, I think, so the work that we've been doing to date is very much focusing on evaluating the effectiveness of several important interventions, a couple of which hold a lot of promise. I think we need to start talking now about how do we scale those types of approaches? How do we explore how those different interventions can work synergistically and take it to scale? So I'm really excited about kind of touching down in a handful of regions and bringing some of these interventions together in a way that can be, replicated and scaled so that we can have maximum impact.
Absolutely. I think this is really speaks to the core of Well Labs' philosophy on kind of transforming systems at scale, which is basically taking a systems approach, but then also at a scale that's meaningful within which you can replicate. So really excited to be able to walk that journey together.
Likewise.
And thank you so much for taking out the time and spending time with us.
Thank you, Veena. We are so excited to work with Well Labs, and your team is amazing.
Thank you.